Assalamu alaikum, ladies and gentlemen. A very good morning. You're requested to please turn off your mobile phones, and we would appreciate if complete silence is maintained throughout the session. Also, there'll be a question and answer session at the end of the discussion, so we would appreciate if you keep your questions concise and please refrain from making statements. So we shall now commence this session. The title of this session is Pakistan, Modernity and Postcoloniality. The moderator for this session is Mr. Hafiz Jamali. Dr. Hafiz Jamali is an academic with eclectic research and teaching interest. He holds a PhD in sociocultural anthropology from the University of Texas, Austin, as well as an MPA from the University of Victoria, Canada. He presently teaches at Habib University, Karachi, endeavoring to help his students develop a critical theoretical apparatus and an interdisciplinary approach towards understanding contemporary society. The session is now yours, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that generous introduction. Let me clarify one little detail about the subject. So it's postcoloniality and modernity today. So we are talking about the state of the field today as it stands. I would also mention that we were actually expecting another colleague, Dr. Shahram Azhar, who is an economist by training. So it was supposed to be a dialogue between an economist and a political economist and an anthropologist and humanist, moderated by me, but perforce Dr. Shahram could not be here because of a family emergency. So I think you will be left to contend with two anthropologists talking with one another, right? In Urdu we call it khud kalami, right? So let me introduce Dr. Noman Naqvi, our guest today. Dr. Naqvi is also an anthropologist by training, a historical anthropologist, moreover, and he is presently the director of Liberal Core at Habib University and a former dean of the School of Humanities and Social Sciences at Habib University. He helped formulate the signature liberal core of the university with its emphasis on understanding our contemporary condition of modernity. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Naqvi to the panel.
Thank you.
Let me start, Dr. Naqvi, by asking you because I see many young men in the audience who may not sort of be familiar with a lot of the terminology we are using. So could you briefly explain for us what do we mean by a post-colonial perspective and the kind of, the kind of critique of modernity that comes from that perspective? So if you could elaborate a bit on that for the audience, that would be great.
Yes, thank you. Starting with the title myself as well. So, postcoloniality and modernity today. This means that we're talking about a history of the present. What is the most significant fact, historical fact about our condition today? Well, just over the past few months, it's been very interesting to watch that the discourse of the Anthropocene has become more and more normalized. Now, what does this mean? Anthropocene, right? The Anthropocene is not just a historical period that we are living in, because when we usually talk about history, we mean human history. We're talking about geological history, right, over here. So the last geological time period lasted for something like 12,000 years. That's the last ice age. It's called the Holocene that preceded this time period. Before that, the geological time period lasted for 2.5 million years. So that's the Pleistocene. So we're talking about an order of time that is much, much larger than we usually think about. So what we are living through is, in fact, many contend, the late Anthropocene. We are not just living in the Anthropocene, that is a time when human beings, and it's not just any old human beings, it's people like us, people who think they are modern, right, have made not just human history. You can say that human beings have always made history, lots of people think that, right, but making geological history, climatological history, right? And this is historically unprecedented. One of the problems with the living in a world of nation states is that we are unable to grasp the most important aspects of our own human condition because we think within the national frame, right? The Anthropocene, one of the features of the Anthropocene is that we are living through the 6th mass extinction of species on the planet, right? This is again, we are talking about an order of time that we are not used to thinking in. Now, why do I start with the Anthropocene? Well, first we have to break out of this nationalist frame. Our title does say Pakistan, right? But we have to remind ourselves which planet we live on. Pakistan is not the name of a Planet. Pakistan is the name of a country, a very recent country, right? So, to break out of that nationalist frame and to see ourselves in a larger context, this is very important. In Pakistan, in particular, educated people think that we live in the worst place on earth. Well, you know, there are lots of terrible places on earth. In fact, it seems more and more that that encompasses the entire globe. A lot of our problems actually are even today shared between the first and the third world, right? We have to understand this, and that's why postcoloniality, right? So it needs clarification that the post, for the young people in the audience, the post in postcoloniality, lots of people think, well, one, it's this fashionable word or something, but secondly, that it refers to the period after decolonization, right? No, that is not what postcolonial refers to. Postcolonial refers to in the wake of colonialism. So if you were going to give a date to postcolonial, everything that happens after 1757, for example, right? It doesn't have to, it doesn't start on a date like that. But that would be the right date if you were looking for a date rather than 1947. Right? So the post-colonial, everything that happens in the wake of colonialism, and we are still living in the wake of colonialism. Why is it important to talk about that today? Well, the colonial regime which ruled South Asia was unlike any other form of imperialism that we had experienced in the past. And how was this the case? It's very important to understand this. How was the experience of modern colonialism, British colonialism, different from the experience of colonialism in the past? What is the difference? The difference is this thing, right? They thought that they were modern. Different from all other people of the past, right? So they ruled South Asia not by the right of the sword, right? And actually into the 18th century, they continued to think, they continued to articulate themselves in this way. So Hastings, for instance, the first Governor General, would not have a problem articulating this, nor would Philip Francis, other officers of the East India Company, right? They would still talk about the right of the sword. It's just the right by force, right? No, they have a historical right towards the end of the 18th century and into the 19th century, right, they develop a sense that they have a historical right, that they are historically different from all other peoples of the past, right? What makes them superior to us, right, is not just any old civilization, right? It is by the verdict of history itself. This is what is implied in the idea of progress, which we have all inherited, right? That in fact, right, people who call themselves Western people, right, are historically superior. It's very important to understand this, right? So that is why you have the first, in terms of the history of imperialism or colonialism in the region, you have the first apartheid state, right? So the Mughal state was not an apartheid state. I don't know how many of you have seen this photograph of Bahadur Shah Zafar, right? Photograph. Right? It's different in his portrait. The photograph, when I first saw it, I was shocked, right? Because Bahadur Shah Zafar was almost black. He was very, very dark, right? Is it possible to imagine a black Englishman? It's a contradiction in terms, right? A white Gora, a black Gora. No, right? So, that is quite an inheritance, right? So you have an apartheid state. Now, what's interesting about this is that this apartheid is part of the idea of progress. You cannot think the two apart, right? Progress means, and historically it was recognized to mean, that until very, very recently, right, that Goras have a historical right to rule. And now, this is not just, as Ashish Nandi says, colonialism is the intimate enemy. It is not just they who are white supremacists, right? We are all white supremacists. It is implied in the idea of progress. The idea of progress implies, right? It's a necessary implication, right? That in fact, there is a race which is historically superior to us. That's a very particular form of superiority, right? So Babur, when he came here, right, disliked a lot of things, obviously preferred his own civilization, right? But he could not have thought, it would have been impossible for him to think that he had a historical charter, right, to rule, historical mandate. By the verdict of history, he and his people, whoever, he didn't have a people. Babur ruled because he was son of Taimur, right? So this is essential, and what went together with that, of course, was that for the first time, you had, all states are extractive in some sense, you had an intercontinentally extractive state, right? This was also new. It completely transformed the nature of our economy.
So I was wondering if you could also link it how we see decolonization in Pakistan. How because there is already there is an available discourse. For example, within at least both the left liberal as well as the sort of the Islamist version of it, right? That, as others have pointed out, people like Partha Chatterjee, right? So if we are able to do away with the heritage of colonialism in the inner domain of the nation, right? Spirituality, culture, family, right? But we can safely continue in the external domain, which is the economy, right? In fact, it is the in many ways, the post-colonial quest for progress precisely depends, right, on adopting those attitudes in the external domain. So I was wondering if you could, elaborate that a little bit. why it, sort of it continues sort of to haunt us in that way.
Well, haunting is too weak a word. It is the very form of life that we all currently and for the foreseeable future inhabit. It's the very way in which our lives are structured. And it's true, actually, this, so one thing, it's possible to completely agree on very, very fundamental issues and be at each other's throats, right? So historically, there was no argument between capitalism and communism, for instance, on progress, right? This is taken for granted, right? It's something that we all take for granted. So, of course, the difference between liberal states and these Islamist states today strikes us as the most urgent question. But in fact, if you look at this great global contestation that happened and which affected us so deeply, right, the Cold War, right, there was fundamental agreement, right, between the capitalist world and the communist world that what the purpose of humanity is to make progress. Right? That is what we are here for. Right? So there can be no argument on the basis of what is the good life. That is something that is fundamentally not up for discussion. Right? Because this idea of progress is as if it has settled the question of the good, right, once and for all. But in terms of this question of Islam, now that you've brought it up, so the other aspect of the colonial state, which was unprecedented in our region, and we're talking about a modern state, they invented, together with being an apartheid state, right, it was also an ethnographic state, right? They studied our cultures. This is what, in fact, nobody talked about, you can imagine this. Culture के बारे में इन लोगों के आने से पहले तो कोई बात नहीं करता था ना कि हमारा क्या कल्चर है. कल्चर का इनफैक्ट जाहिर है आपने उसको अडॉप्ट कर लिया उर्दू में, वो लफ्ज़ ही इस्तेमाल करना शुरू कर दिया, राइट? सो वो क्या है इन लोगों ने मालूम करने की कोशिश की, उसको ऑब्जेक्टिफाई करने की कोशिश की, राइट? द स्टडी ऑफ आवर कल्चर्स, आपने उर्दू में क्या कहते हैं उसको इजाद किया बाद में लफ्ज़ सकाफत, राइट? ये कोई आपकी माजी से तो लफ्ज़ नहीं आ रहा, राइट? These are new objects that are being created. मज़हब, राइट? मज़हब जो है, अब हम सब लोग ये समझते हैं कि मज़हब का मतलब है रिलीजन, हाँ? मगर मज़हब का मतलब अगर आप 18वीं सदी में बल्कि 19वीं सदी में भी किसी से पूछते भाई आपका क्या मज़हब है, तो कहता मैं कहता मेरा फ़िक़्ह जाफ़रिया से ताल्लुक़ है, मैं हनफ़ी हूँ,
right, ये हनफ़ी मज़हब,
हाँ,
हम्बली मज़हब,
हाँ, so ये मतलब ही बदल दिए, right? So it enumerated us, right? This state enumerated us as these ethnographic communities, cultural communities, which we've inherited. देखिए इसके अंदर it is an absolutely remarkable fact, right? कि इस्लाम में 1300 साल में, right, हजारों किताबें लिखी गई, right? I challenge you to go and find me a book for these centuries, right, which has Islam in the title. बड़ी बड़ी किताबें यहाँ पे हुजवीरी की किताब सबसे पहले आप देख लें, right, for instance, from the 10th century, कश्फ अल-महजूब, the revelation of the veiled. अल-ग़ज़ाली की बहुत अहम किताब, right, his magnum opus, Ahya al-Ulum.
and the errors of the philosophers, right?
हाँ, तहाफ़तुल फ़िलासफ़ा, right, मिशकातुल अनवार, इब्न अल-अरबी की किताब फ़ुसूसुल हिकम, and his magnum opus फुतूहात मक्किया. यहाँ हमारे रीजन में 18वीं सदी में शाह वली अल्लाह ने किताब लिखी हुज्जतुल्लाह अल-बालिग़ा, right? You can go on and on, right? None of these books have Islam in the title. Kamal ki baat hai, doesn't it bear reflection? It's extraordinary. And all of a sudden you have Musaddas, Maddo Jazre Islam.
You're talking about Hali, right?
Hali, right? Sayyid Ahmad Khan के इर्द गिर्द जो लोग थे, उन्होंने इस्लाम का बड़ा चर्चा किया. Shibli Nomani, he wrote this series called Heroes of Islam. अंग्रेजी में मदरसे के पढ़े हुए थे, right? अंग्रेजी नहीं आती थी. हीरो तो उर्दू में कोई लफ्ज ही नहीं है, आपको अंग्रेजी का ही लफ्ज लेना पड़ेगा हीरो. अच्छा, Heroes of Islam. This is the series. The first book in this series is Al Farouk. और भी बहुत सारी किताबें उन्होंने लिखी. हाँ? मगर ये एकदम कमाल की बात नहीं है. एकदम after centuries, right? All of a sudden, Islam comes into existence. Right? This is in the colonial context. ये जो आज सब कुछ हो रहा है, right? So, दूसरी चीज, one of the problems with this idea of progress is that it makes it impossible for us to think historically, right? क्योंकि history is not a process where you keep leaving the past behind, right? History is a process of sedimentation, right? It's a question of layers, right? Faulkner ने बड़ी अच्छी बात कही थी, right? He says the past isn't dead, it isn't even past. Okay. The present itself is layered. You can't think about the present also as a result of this ideology of progress. The other day, there was this historian who was talking at Habib University about how to think historically. And the remarkable thing is that everyone is very, very skeptical that you can have any knowledge of history. Because it's gone, the past is gone, right? As if you know your present. So the present itself, you think is completely given to you, completely available to you. Just because you live in this time period, you know this time period. No, obviously not. It takes a lot of work, right? To try to understand where you are, what's going on, what sense does it make, right? So this, again, this ideology of progress, but it is a remarkable fact, right? It is a remarkable fact. There are other layers, if you're thinking about the kinds of, what they call identities, right? ये भी बड़ी अजीब सी चीज है. Identities, this is also something that we've inherited, right? We have this identity card, right? 492308 etc. वो तो नंबर के तो समझ में आता है. Identity 492308 is equal to 492308. But what sense does it make to say Noman Naqvi is identical to Noman Naqvi? Right? So we've all inherited these crazy ideas about the self, identity. What identity? Being a Muslim is not an identity. Being a Muslim is a task. It is a task. Professor Barbara Metcalf wrote this. She put together this excellent volume with an introduction as well as an essay in there called Moral Conduct and Authority. I don't know if any of you were there in the session yesterday with her. Moral Conduct and Authority, the place of adab in Islamic culture, right? So it's a question, it's a task, right? In the Quran itself, Islam, right, is used in the sense of taslim. It is not the name of a religion, right? So these are these remarkable facts about our condition, which are completely related to this colonial past.
So in terms of, again, sort of to bring it a little bit sort of fast forward it in some ways. We were talking earlier and one of the colleagues said that you refer to the 16th century as if it was just happened. Just happened
yesterday. I mean, in terms, you're talking about the Anthropocene, you have to adjust how you think of time, right? 400 years is nothing, it's the blink of an eye.
So, but with due apologies if I may sort of, bring you up to speed against your wishes, how we can think of what is some of the things that have been going on, and I'm thinking of late 80s onwards, and how we can bring this critique of modernity and a post-colonial perspective to bear on that. So, because in terms of even our notion of historical time or progress, right? That itself has undergone significant changes over the last 30, 40 years. So under Ayub Khan and Nehru, right? If we talk in a comparative sense. So the idea of progress was this slow unfolding of modernity, right? So you built a dam or a project or road, and then at the end of 10 or 20 years, right? You will get there, right? You will eventually arrive, right? You will become modern. But if we look at today, right? So we are looking at a very different dynamic, since the 1990s, right? The idea in terms of, if you look at this contemporary discourse of the mega projects or the China-Pakistan economic corridor, so the idea, our contemporary idea of modernity is that we know what it is, we know it is there, we have seen it in Dubai, in Singapore, in Hong Kong, right? So it's not about historical progression anymore, right? It is about availing that, right? It's like having our own Dubai in Gawada, right? Huh? So while I agree with you that this idea of progress has been central and continues, right, to structure our thought and opinion and imagination, but we also have to maybe perhaps and I find it remarkable because a couple weeks back, Gyan Prakash was here, and he was one of the things that he mentioned that led to the rise of Hindutva was that the communists had this idea of, communists in India had this idea of the long struggle, for, getting equality or, revolution or whatnot. Whereas the BJP, the RSS guy would go out and beat up the whoever it was and get you that.
Right.
Right? So in terms of, so I was wondering if we could sort of speak to that as well in terms of, how our contemporary ideas of progress and modernity in the wake of this, one might call late liberal or neoliberal turn, right? Have undergone certain changes. Or is that?
I think you're both right, as well as it was always there kind of thing on top, right? As I see it, it's the internal nihilism of progress, right, is what is coming to the fore. We live in a very, very strange time period. So many things, one of the first philosophers of modernity, Hegel, right, says the owl of Minerva only rises at dusk, right? When something is already past, that is when, or just on its way out, that you can see it, you have knowledge of it, right? So it might well be the case that it is only now, when the world is about to come to an end, right, that the meaning of progress is becoming clear, right? What the project was actually all about, right, has been all about. And the nihilism today is extraordinary. I mean, I won't say the names, but two intellectuals that I respect a great deal were having a conversation, and they were having a conversation precisely about this nostalgia, about what it is, how to compare the past, the pre-modern past, with the modern period. And one of them said, well, tell me this, would you rather live today than 500 years ago, right? And the other fellow said, I would much rather live 500 years ago. He says, that's the difference between you and me, right? I would never make such a choice. Of course, it's meaningless we can't make these choices, right? They're not available to us. But the most interesting thing about this conversation to me was, when he said, what about the climate catastrophe? What about the ecological catastrophe that we are confronting today? And remarkably, the other fellow, who's a great intellectual, right, said, our children will take care of it. Right? It's insane. This is complete nihilism, right? Okay, you don't give a damn. You are not going to change the way you live, right? Even if it means that there will be no longer be posterity, right? There will be no posterity. You don't care, right? This is complete nihilism. This is what progress is all about, right? In the end, okay, you're going to enjoy and have fun, right? Live a comfortable life, do whatever the hell. This is what counts, right? This is what counts. So this, in fact, I think this nihilism that was at the heart of progress anyway, right? I mean, so one of the first books they read in this course, in the liberal core curriculum at Habib University, is called Exterminate All the Brutes, The Origins of European Genocide, right? And the section that they read is from the 19th century, right? So together with the idea of progress is this idea of life being a struggle. Urdu में भी इस्तेमाल करना शुरू किया जब ये translate होने शुरू किया ना सैयद अहमद खान में, race of life, right? पहले समझ में नहीं आया उसको उर्दू में कहेंगे क्या? Race of life. फिर बाद में उन्होंने कहा जिंदगी की दौड़, as if it's obvious, and this is the order of nature, right? So it was nihilistic from the beginning, right? Okay, but we're going to wipe out all of these people. This is literally what they were saying. All darkies deserve to die, right? What are they doing in this historical moment? This is the thing, right? This is the idea of progress. कि आप पहले तो बाबर ये सोच सकता था, right? कि ये लोग जो हैं, they're not as civilized as I am. He could not think, what the hell are they doing at this moment in history? Why aren't they already in the past? They belong to the past, right? This is the nihilism, right?
And I was wondering, this brings me to the subject of economy, right? Part of the discourse of modernity and progress has been to accord a privileged place or space to the economy, right?
Yes.
And make it in some ways almost sacrosanct, right?
Yes.
So, I mean, even in the case of, socialist thinkers, right? People who come from Marxism, who are critics of capitalism, right? But even we have seen in the actual sort of plans that were adopted in socialist countries was that the management of the economy, it merely was a question of change in the management of economy. So instead of laissez-faire capitalism, you had state capitalism of sorts, right? No, it didn't really translate. Socialism didn't really translate into some kind of social democracy or a decentralized economy or anything, right?
Yeah.
So I was wondering, how do you see that, this privileging of the economy, and how we can unpack that category?
Yeah, again, it's this, as if what is the good life is already given, right? पहले से ही पता है. What ensures a good life is economic growth. Acha, and the logic of this thing is remarkable, right? कि if I, and this is the argument, right? If I act on my self-interest, this is defined by economic reason, right? If I act in my self-interest, my career will advance, right? As a result, my family, they will also advance, right? And the nation will advance, and humanity will advance. So, on the basis of selfishness, progress will happen. This is the basic premise, right? Or the example that you've given actually immediately reminds me the fact that there was never any real contradiction between capitalism and communism is self-evident today in China. China is the very embodiment of this. There was never really any argument between the two. The two can perfectly well coexist together, right? Because they share the same ends. Asal cheez to ye कि purpose to is common between the two.
And also, sort of in terms of conceptualizing the economy, right? Or the critique of economy, because, it's, we were talking earlier about it, and you said that, we tend to think of economy as if it is an object. It's like the sun or the moon or the stars, right? And so it cannot sort of be subject to critique or unpacking or being thought in a way that it is shaped by human beings.
Yes. Yeah, of course. How are you going to ask the question, should there be an economy? Should it exist? Should there be an economy? No. This is like asking, should there be a sun? Because apparently the economy is given. Hoti hai, hamesha se hoti hai. Really? No, actually. It's a very, very recent phenomenon. Right? And it's constituted as an object. Right? इसी तरीके से बिल्कुल. So there are all these fantastic objects, right? Islam, completely fantastic. Pakistan, completely fantastic. Like उसकी कोई हकीकत से कुछ ताल्लुक नहीं है उसका, right? But it exists, right? And everybody believes in it. Everybody talks about it, right? So इसी तरीके से economy भी है. What planet? As if there is a planet on which history exists, another planet on which the economy exists, another one in which culture exists, right? And this is the way on the basis of which intellectual work is actually organized. यूनिवर्सिटियों में यही होता है कि वो एक डिपार्टमेंट economics का है, एक और डिपार्टमेंट उसका हिस्ट्री का है, right? As if it's possible. Yes.
And I was wondering if you could also sort of explain, reflect a bit on how sort of how unpacking some of these categories can help us understand in the wake of sort of the recent work on South Asia, on issues that I referred to earlier, issues of communalism, issues of national identity, because there is a palpable sense in Pakistan, at least among Pakistanis, wherever you go, and this has been revealed, this has been communicated to me by our Indian colleagues, that you guys seem so disillusioned and despondent. Right? So we tend to think that what is happening, the kind of crises we are facing in Pakistan are in some ways unique, that somehow our neighboring countries like India are free of them. There is also, this sense is also buttressed by, the international discourse about Pakistan as a quote-unquote a failed state, right? Now we know, there are terrible things happening in Pakistan, right? I come from Balochistan, and the situation there is really, really catastrophic, right? In terms of human rights, in terms of basic idea of security of life. But at the same time, is that condition somehow unique to us? Are these failures unique to Pakistan as a country? Or are they part of the broader structures of contemporary social change, right?
एक तो यही मसला है कि हम लोग ज़्यादा से ज़्यादा, because this nationalism, nation state is all about navel gazing. So ज़्यादा से ज़्यादा आपकी नज़र में आएगा कोई और मुल्क, right? तो वो हिंदुस्तान आएगा, India, right? There are lots of countries in the world. You have to have some idea of what's happening in Africa, in Southeast Asia. Sari dunya mein, there's a lot of the problems that we have, we share with a lot of countries, right? These are really bad times planetarily, right? It's simply the case all over the world that we're going through really one of the, probably the worst period of human history, right? Is upon us. So, yes, there is that on the one hand, but more on the first part of your question, I want to say something about what this is doing in terms of scholarship, right? So, Wazira Zamindar ki kitab, The Long Partition, I don't know how many people have seen that, one of the best books that has come out on Pakistan over a long period of time, right? And a direct result of this perspective, right? Of this post-colonial perspective. Okay, you're so obsessed with the nation state, you've created these fantastic histories for yourself, you're actually not capable of looking at the actual event, right, of decolonization, the actual event of nation state formation, right, which is incredibly violent, right, and in fact unravels all of the ideology that the nation state rests on, So अब वो किसी को पता है, वजीरा ज़मींदार has brilliant chapters on this, right? किसी को पता है यहाँ पे ऑडियंस में कि जब पाकिस्तान बना supposedly for the Muslims of South Asia, तो क्या हुआ कि इन्होंने कहा वो जो इंडियन मुस्लिम्स भाग भाग के फिर आ रहे थे, इंडियन मुस्लिम्स नॉर्थ इंडिया, तो उनका आप नहीं आ सकते, स्टे पुट, जिन्ना साहब, लियाकत अली खान एटसेट्रा, राइट? उन लोगों ने कहा, जो इंडियन मुस्लिम्स तो फिर वही हुए ना, हिंदुस्तान के मुसलमानों के लिए बनाया था ना ये मुल्क, राइट? उनको कह रहे हैं यहां नहीं आ सकते आप, राइट? सो you want to actually look, you want to see, Rasulullah की खुदा से दुआ थी, allow me to see things as they are. You want to see things as they are, right? This is the way things are, right? कि ये हुआ, this is what happened, right? It was an absolutely catastrophic event. The other thing that it's doing, this post-colonial perspective, once you've freed yourself from all of these silly, fantastic ideas about progress, etc., then you can return to thinking about the past which is not just past, it is also present, right? So it opens up phenomena in the present. मगर एक नई निगाह से, it makes it possible. एक तो ये हुआ ना कि a lot of these people who were talking about post-colonial thought, right? Subaltern studies, for instance, none of them actually had the languages to look at the pre-modern period, right? So that's one of the things that that colonialism did, right? Is it took away languages. I mean, it created a new kind of human being, right? आप ये सोचिए कि ये बिल्कुल इंसान की तारीख में एक नए किस्म का इंसान है जिसको अपनी ज़बान नहीं आती. ये कभी हुआ पहले? ऐसे कभी इस तरह के लोग पैदा हुए जिनको अपनी ज़बान नहीं आती, right? It's a contradiction. But nevertheless, so what this post-colonial perspective, so really find new works, like जैसे असफर मोइन की किताब है about the Mughal period, right? So it changes. In fact, there is a close, what should one say, synergy, possible synergy between medieval studies and post-colonial studies. In fact, there are people doing medieval studies from a post-colonial perspective because they encounter, क्योंकि medieval period के बारे में जो भी कहता है medieval, आपको ऐसे dark ages etc. as if you already know what the medieval period, कुछ पता है, ऐसे ही खुद ब खुद पता है. Just because you are modern, you already know what the past was about, right? So the other thing that is happening is that there is really new, fine, conceptually rich, historically rich, right, philologically rich work coming out about the past. Yes.
We are running out of time, so I would open the floor for questions from the audience. Please, you're welcome to ask any questions.
Ji,
the gentleman. Ji, can you give the mic to the gentleman? Ji Latif Sahab.
Sir, Pakistan is a unique model of a state system which was, I mean, if you see the other states, they became first nations and then they became states. Pakistan was the first that it became a state and it was expected it will become a nation. So we should not be, I mean, pessimistic about Pakistan. We should not link it with the burden of history. We should rather start from the independence. And I hope if, just Jamali Saab said that perhaps we are failing. We are not failing, but actually our first generation of our leadership has failed, and I have a lot of trust in the new generation of Pakistan. They are very much resilient. Whenever there is a common problem to Pakistan, in case of earthquake or any natural calamities, the Pakistan nation has always responded. So we should not be, I mean, pessimistic about it. So my question
What's your question? Yes.
is idea of progress, I think, is embedded with modernity. Modernity, and that is not necessarily that modernity is simply about the progress of consciousness.
Okay.
Consciousness, not simply material prosperity, is effect of that consciousness. When Europe became enlightened, then they made the progress. So, as far as the history of progress, I mean the history of consciousness in Pakistan, as I already told you, the new generation.
other
Yeah,
people,
can you complete the
और
question
भी
because
सारे
there are
लोग
other
हैं।
questions.
Okay, sir. So actually,
अच्छा, हो गया बस।
my question,
That's fine now.
my question is, there is a paradox that you said Pakistan was made for the Muslims of India. Actually, if you see the genesis of the Pakistan, Pakistan was made on the basis of the regional factors, regional, I mean,
Right.
assemblies, it was assemblies
Right,
of the
right.
different
अच्छा, okay,
provinces,
ठीक है।
they actually accept, and there was no migration in the
देखिए आप
province.
यहाँ आके बैठ जाए, मैं उधर
नहीं आप सही आप बैठे हैं
Sir,
नकवी साहब
I'm
नकवी साहब
finishing.
प्लीज
My question
Please.
is, there was no migration.
Thank you, Sai. We took
Before
your question.
that-
Thank you, Sai. Thank you, Sai. That's a very good question. Let me just quickly say, I never said that Pakistan was a failed state. I refer to the American and Western discourse about Pakistan, and you are right. And that is actually a very good intervention. That that the role of provincial politics in the making of Pakistan has been downplayed in the historiography of Pakistan. So that's a well made point. I want Dr. Naqvi to comment briefly on, can we really think of modernity without the idea of progress? Is it possible?
I'm not sure what that means, but that's not what he was actually saying. He was because he was saying that this spiritual. He thinks that the Enlightenment, which was a spiritual
Right.
event, right? This is the other interesting thing, right?
Sure,
So the
consciousness.
enlightened one, right? जैसे कि Bodhisattva है, right? वो he is enlightened. यहाँ क्या हुआ? An entire historical period is enlightened. हाँ, पूरी की पूरी कौम enlightened हो गई. पहले कोई औलिया होते थे enlightened, अनबिया होते थे, right? Enlightened. यहाँ पे पूरी की पूरी एक नस्ल जो है वो enlightened हो गई. So ये this is the story of progress, right? ये अपने आप यही कहानी बताते हैं अपने आप की कि पहले dark ages थे, right? गोरे यही बताते हैं ना, पहले dark ages थे, फिर enlightenment हुई, जिनमें उनकी पूरी की पूरी कौम जो है वो enlightened हो गई. हाँ, सो फिर उसके बाद इंडस्ट्रियल रेवोल्यूशन आया, क्योंकि वो एनलाइटेंड हो गए थे सबके सब, राइट? औलिया बन गए थे सबके सब, राइट? तो उसके बाद उन्होंने मेहनत की और मेहनत के नतीजे में सनती इनकलाब आया. सो दिस इज द स्टोरी, दिस इज द स्टोरी ही इज टेलिंग.
Right. I think he has a more right.
It was
Right.
enlightenment is actually discarded religion in the West.
Right. No, sir.
And they become secular.
Sir.
राइट.
So there's nothing, I mean, you are taking with the spirituality was
No, sir. Your point is well taken. Can we have this gentleman over there? Yeah.
थैंक यू नकवी साहब, आपको सुन के और आपकी तहरीरों को पढ़ के हम मतलब सीखते हैं. और मैं सिर्फ एक तालिब इल्म नहीं हूँ, पॉलिटिकल एक्टिविस्ट भी हूँ, और हम समाज को बदलने की जद्दोजहद भी करते रहते हैं. आपका बहुत शुक्रिया कि आज मौका मिला. एक छोटा सा सवाल और एक तरह से वजाहत मैं चाहूँगा कि आप रखिएगा. आपने बात की चाइना को मिसाल रखते हुए कि कैपिटलिज़म और सोशलिज़म जो इन दी एंड एक ही निकलते हैं. क्या आप रियली मार्क्सिज़म के बारे में बात कर रहे हैं, या बहुत सारी जो हमसे मार्क्सिस्टों से गलतियां हुई उसके बारे में बात कर रहे हैं? और एक छोटी सी चीज़ मैं मेंशन करूंगा कि एंगल्स ने एक लेटर जो है लिखा था, अभी एग्जैक्टली उसका पूरा कॉन्टेक्स्ट मुझे मतलब किस दोस्त के नाम लिखा वो याद नहीं है, लेकिन वो इस बारे में था, उनकी परेशानी का अपने ख़दशे का इजहार करते हैं कि मैंने और मार्क्स ने जो कुछ लिखा था, हाँ ये ठीक है कि हम जो है वो दौर ऐसा था कि हमें इकानमी पे काफ़ी ज़्यादा बात की, लेकिन हमारा कतई तौर पे ये मतलब तो नहीं था। लेकिन ये जो यंग मार्क्सिस्ट हैं, ये जिस तरह से इकानमी 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 करते जा रहे हैं,
हाँ।
ये मुझे ख़तरनाक लग रहा है।
बहुत शुक्रिया।
तो मार्क्सिज्म तो कहीं मतलब मैं तो वहाँ से सीखता हूँ। काइंडली
थैंक यू नकवी साहब, if you could
Thank
reflect.
you. Very interesting
That's a
question.
very interesting
Marxism, of course, मतलब Marx was an extremely क्या कहना चाहिए productive thinker. So there were lots of contradictions in his own thought, right? Contradictions which he himself was aware of and would reflect on. ये सब चीजें हैं, मगर there were serious limits also, right? So अब आप ये देखिए कि मार्क्स का हाँ देहात के बारे में हाँ क्या ख्याल है, right? What does he think? He calls गालियां देता है गांव के लोगों को, right? He thinks the idiocy of village life, he calls it, right? So क्या ख्याल है कि इंसान एक रोज इतनी तरक्की करेगा कि उसको खाना खाने की जरूरत नहीं पड़ेगी, हाँ देहाती जिंदगी खत्म हो जाएगी, right? दूसरा real historical limit on Marx's thought, right, was he was simply did not see that nature is a finite thing, right? There's a limit, right? That limit of nature, right? This is also enlightenment thought, right? कि आपको ये नजर ही नहीं आता. Because one of the major events that happened right at the beginning of this period of modernity, कल की बात है 17th century, right? 17th century में Francis Bacon, right, who's one of the important thinkers of the Renaissance, he says that the purpose of knowledge is to dominate nature, right? Explicitly, right? Purpose of knowledge, ये मकसद है इल्म का, right? कि आपको dominate करना है nature को, right? भाई nature तो आप खुद हैं, आप कहीं कोई खुदा हैं, you are some other, you are a spirit, right? No, right? So this is another limit in Marxism, right? So you cannot, the critique of capitalism, right, cannot happen, and you cannot understand essential features of modernity without reading Marx, right? So इसमें तो कोई शक नहीं, मगर these are some of the limits as well.
We have a gentleman, Adim, here, and then we have a gentleman on the left over there.
Shukriya Noman Sahab, and I would like to ask a question regarding sort of your idea of the good life within this Anthropocene sort of scale of time. And I am absolutely in agreement with you, but when we're thinking about modernity in terms of sort of the proliferation and the production of desires, again, I'm another anthropologist, so we go into the field and we talk to sort of a broad swath. The audience for our discourses is broader than just, we hear. And sometimes when I say exactly the same things that you are, the response that I get from really sort of thinking people, in my fieldwork is in Liari, and they say, look, what you're saying is that I should foreclose the possibility of attainment of desires that you have already experienced. You coming from defense, you living in the US, you have already attained these desires and then discarded them, and you're foreclosing those possibilities for me. And I'm wondering if that could be characterized as nihilism, or is it the limitations of the sort of terms in which we actually proliferate this discourse?
So, इसमें तो कोई शक नहीं कि this machine of progress, right? इसमें तो हम सब फंसे हुए हैं, right? इसमें तो कोई शक ही नहीं. So you can't extricate yourself from this. मगर desire का जो मामला है, right? So it's very interesting that the entire relationship to the question of desire, right, has also been dramatically transformed. So one of the first things we do, and at Habib University in the Liberal Corps, one of the first books that the students read is The Phaedrus by Plato, which is about love. It's one of his two dialogues on love. And this problematic of desire, right, is something that has always been there with us, right? मगर उसके अंदर ये था कि, right, you are to give shape to desire, right? That is the task of human existence. The question is, भाई desire तो है, हजारों ख्वाहिश हैं ऐसी कि हर ख्वाहिश पे दम निकले, right? मगर desire for what, right? किस चीज की ख्वाहिश करते हैं आप, and how do you, अब वो the problematic of desire, जैसे कि अब गालिब का शेर है, आशिकी सब्र तलब और तमन्ना बेताब. आशिकी भी ऐसा नहीं है, these are not two separate things, they are related. Ishq is a form of desire, right? So हमारे यहाँ ये क्या हुआ है कि this new kind of subject, in fact it's not possible, right? अगर आपको, if you do not give shape to your desires, and that is the task that you are confronted with as an individual, task that you are confronted with as societies, etc. What is it you are going to want, right? And this is a very social question. It is not something that one settles on one's own either, right? अब हमारे यहाँ ये पहले मालूम था कि भाई there was the option, lots of people took it, right? कि the conquest of desire, there is a whole class of people who was just devoted to that. But that was just as much part of the everyday for other people as well. Not to in the same intensity, but at varying levels of intensity. So, I'm sorry.
Last question and a brief response because we're running out of time.
Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Naqvi. Should I say for enlightening us? As you said that, and correct me if I'm wrong, that every conqueror or colonizer, from the Mughals to the British, thought that they had a historical right to rule. Do you think it can be related to the post-partition power struggle for regional dominance between India and Pakistan? Do you think this is some characteristic that we inherited from the colonizers?
No, so
Thank you.
thank you for that question. I'll clarify. Again, there's a fundamental difference. The Mughals did not think that they had a historical right, that they were given a charter by history itself, by progress, right, to rule India. That's the difference. That's the historical difference between modern colonialism, right, and imperialisms of the past. That's what I was saying.
Thank you very much, Dr. Naqvi, and thank you all for listening patiently to us and asking these engaging questions. We'll conclude the session now. Thank you.